Welcome back to the Comics Cube. We are back with J.H. Williams III to talk Echolands number 3. And
Yeah.
Any feedback on this book so far? 3 issues in.
Not as much as we got on the 1 and 2, but the feedback I have seen has been positive. I've seen it a couple places that are kind of like, people need to read this book, like from some stores and stuff. They're pushing it. But yeah, not as much, but that doesn't surprise me, you know.
Is there a usual delay anyway, like maybe after 2 or 3 issues of
yeah, that, and weirdly, I think there's been maybe a slow uptake in some ways. So I think, you know, as an example, I got a letter to the letters page email still about number 1. So
really?
there's, yeah. So I think there's some, you know, it's a slow uptake, I think, you know. I think it's, you know, people are purchasing the book, but I don't know if they're necessarily diving in right away or whatever. But, you know, like I said, I did see some retailers kind of like, there's this one retailer, I don't know if they're a retailer or if they're a like another news site, I think called the Comic Source. Might be a retailer.
Could be
They've been
both.
retweeting several times the last few days, you know, about, they keep repeating the same tweet saying, you know, how much they love the comic and people need to buy the damn comic. So, you know, and I did see another retailer mention that they still have copies of number 1 that they did well, but they still have copies of number 1 and number 2, and now they showed a picture of number 3 being out, and they kind of said, we're kind of like saying, why do I still have copies of this book? Kind of like in a positive way, saying like, why isn't it moving more prominently? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got to tell you, of everything you've done in this book so far, and we'll get to this later, but I got to the end of the main story and I went, holy shit.
Good.
So
I think one of the best comments I saw from somebody on Instagram, I can't remember who said it, but they said it's like JH and Haden have dumped out all their toys on the floor and are making a universe out of them.
I was reading it, I got to the end, and I guess I always kind of felt it in the back of my head, but that's when I kind of felt that, wow, out of everything that you've thrown in so far, you're only scratching the surface.
Yeah, we're trying to be anyway.
I can't wait. Let's talk about the cover. I know you've talked about how difficult these covers are to do. When I got this book, I opened it up and it was this way, and I thought it was this way because it also works this way. So it actually works 3 ways.
Oh, cool. That's one of the ones that, yeah, it's relatively effective layout wise.
Was this one easier to do than the other 2?
No.
No. Harder? No.
A little bit, because especially knowing where dealing with the logo and the placement of the teeth. So yeah, I fretted over the position of the logo a lot, and then I came after, when I started toying with that part, I started thinking about, oh well, let's maybe center the circle more, so it acts a little bit more like a target on her, and allows us to see the teeth of the creature, you know, because otherwise there was too much interference.
So these little lines over here kind of act like ropes, and it's up to you how far they go. Or
yeah, right, yeah.
Interesting. The book opens up with Romulus of, we'll find out later, Treasure Island, but we find out he's from 4th Rome, and Torch Grinder. And I love already, like, this was already really striking to me, how Romulus is drawn in the very Kirby-esque way.
Yeah.
Well, Torch Grinder is drawn in a, what do you call that kind of thing?
uh, I don't
1970s
know.
horror type, black
Yeah,
and white,
yeah,
Warren type of way. Yeah.
yeah. Very much the same as Rosa. Yeah,
Yeah, very. So I'm assuming he's also from Horror Hill.
yeah.
Okay. And what is it about, this is probably going to be a dumb question now that I'm going to say it. What is it about Jack Kirby that makes him perfect for these kinds of characters?
I don't know. I I guess maybe a character like Romulus is so over the top, and it becomes even more pronounced how over the top his personality is in the next issue. Um, so he's almost overly dramatic, and I think Kirby's art kind of has that bigger than life drama to it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. There's just something about the energy of his work that makes it feel that way, just grandiose. So when we thought about Fourth Rome, we were that was like my immediate go-to was like, oh yeah, no, this needs to be inspired by Kirby. I'm super excited for whenever we finally get to see Fourth Rome. That's going to be super exciting to draw. It'll be challenging, but it'll be fun.
Is Fourth Rome the name also inspired by the Fourth World, or
I think so. I'd like
okay?
to think so.
The,
I don't know if that was our initial reason,
oh,
other than we wanted a Rome that was an evolution of Rome, or an evolution of the idea of Rome, uh, of a Roman, you know, um, civilization that was like a empire. And so we didn't want to just settle with, I think maybe early on we called it New Rome. It wasn't distinct enough. And we said, oh, well, since we're talking about these cultures that have kind of morphed into their own things and have evolved over time, I think that's where it led us to Fourth Rome, and it was serendipitous that it was that, and then we chose kind of a Kirby homage for those characters from there. So yeah, it just seemed fitting to call it that.
now despite that, well, first of all, Fourth Rome is implies the existence of a second and a third Rome at some point in time, right?
Yeah, right.
And I assume that that'll be part of the history of Echolands when you get around to telling it.
Yeah, if we ever get to a point where we can explore the history of the this version of a Roman Empire, to me, it almost makes me think. I mean, we haven't settled on what we're going to do with that, but in my mind, it makes me think about uh, maybe generations of an empire or a family lineage of an empire. So
Oh
maybe
yeah.
there was four families over time, and this is the fourth family to kind of maybe be uh, in charge of the Fourth Rome. So
I'm,
maybe the land, maybe it changes over time, the name.
I'm excited to see it. What goes into Romulus's design?
Um, well, obviously I wanted something that was very Kirby inspired. You know, initially our initial notes was just like a futuristic Roman um type of soldier type of design, but I think we pushed it pretty far past that. So we're kind of like, well, what would that look like over time with a culture that has some sort of technology uh, mixed in, and that led to kind of more of the Kirby color schemes and things like that. Um, but the skull and crossbones is because he views himself as a pirate, so it's almost like his personal symbol, since he's acting as this pirate ruling over Treasure Island. It's an interesting kind of touch because here's, you can kind of loosely see the Roman influence
Yeah.
in the design, other than there's more color. Initially, it was like you would think it'd be all gold, right?
Yeah.
But I thought, like, well, what was so exciting about Kirby designs for characters is his use of breaking up the design with contrasting colors, and I really wanted to capture that effect, particularly because we were going to use the skull and crossbone thing, and it makes this interesting kind of hybrid thing with the guy, you know. And then at the same time, you know, he kind of views himself as like this, you know, demigod or whatever, you know. So yeah, it's fun.
I feel like, you know, there's elements of, you know, definitely various Kirby characters, but there's only a limited number of Kirby characters with a cape. So I thought that
True.
was fascinating.
True.
What about Torch Grinder? What goes into his design? And
Before I touch on that, the thing with the cape, I think that's something that we'll get to with Romulus. Like,
okay.
obviously on the first page we see him wearing a cape, but all the other scenes with him, he doesn't have it. So, and then if there's also slight variations of his design on the first page versus how he looks in the deeper part of the story. So I wanted to show that he's not stuck in one look, even though it's all very similar. But the cape, I think, is kind of it'll be an interesting touch. And I think if we get to show him when we get to return to those scenes that are, you know, we're teasing on the first page, I think the cape idea will actually make him seem even more Roman-like. You know, when you think about the I can't think of what they're called right now. The Roman soldiers, when they would have those red capes coming off, or like a robe slash cape coming off of their armor. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. So I think it's kind of cool to show that. But Torch Grinder, basic, simple. We wanted a Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster dude. And I remember, this could be not true. It might be just the way my brain is remembering it. But I think I remember seeing a 1970s horror comic, might even be in a Marvel horror comic, where Frankenstein had like this fur thing. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And particularly because we also show werewolves. So you're like, oh, that's obviously a pelt of a wolf, you know? So it makes you, when you start to think about the little details like that, a reader can extrapolate and go, oh, I wonder, maybe the Frankenstein monsters, they fight werewolves, or, you know, there's like all this stuff that we can drop in, that we can tease, that could be explored later.
Speaking of connecting visuals, I just want to say this is only the first page of the third issue, and you've established the Golem's visuals so well that everyone knows whose hand that is on the lower left.
Yeah. Is it though?
Oh. Throwing me a curveball there.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah,
this is
the look of that is so distinct. Yeah, it looks like, yeah, it's meant to look like the Golem. So
it's meant to look like the Golem. Okay, we'll keep that wording in mind. The next double page spread, we touched on this at the end of the last issue, but what is it about the sea that you love drawing so much?
I don't know.
Do you like the sea as a person? Do you like going to the beach? Yeah,
I do. Unfortunately, like if we live in the desert, which is, so it's kind of ironic. But I always liked going to the ocean. I'm very sensitive to molds.
Okay.
So like if I tried to live by the ocean, I don't know if I could, because I'm really affected by mold really easily, which sucks because I do love the ocean so much. I mean, I easily could just stare out at the ocean, the endless waves of it. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel the same about the ocean as I do about the desert. Like when you go out into the desert and there's no one else around, And if you can go to a beach when there's no one else around, it's a very similar kind of like calm vastness of something bigger than you, you know.
Yeah.
I really like that feeling.
Sand either way. You're clearly
Yeah.
not Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah. And there's a mysteriousness to it, to both vistas, to staring out at the sea or staring out across a desert. Both have this kind of mysterious feel to them that makes you easily can get lost in your thoughts and wonder about things, you know.
Do you
Yeah.
think that looking at something that vast, because we've talked about how important empathy is before to
Yeah.
artists, do you think looking at something that vast builds up empathy?
Yeah, and it also kind of humbles you in how small you are as an individual. Same with, I guess, looking out into the cosmos. I can do the looking out into the cosmos. I feel the same thing about how limited uh, being a human is in some ways. You know, about our place in the scheme of things. And it's interesting because, like, you know, particularly being working in a creative field, because a creative field, it's like this, you're trying to like have this big outreach to reach beyond yourself, right? And uh so it kind of like it's like this weird dichotomy in a way, because you're wanting to expand and be bigger in a way, but then when you have these moments of revelation looking out across the ocean or a desert out into the cosmos, you know, you realize like, okay, I'm a speck, you know, in everything about the universe. You know what I mean? I think it's healthy to understand that, you know. It helps put the ego in check, you know.
And when it comes to drawing the sea, how is it? What are the challenges involved?
Fluidity, I think. I still think I don't have that down. Um, like there's some, I couldn't name them, but there's, you know, some master painters that can capture the fluidness and the drama of the ocean so spectacularly. That's what I'm always trying to evoke. I just I just feel like I don't get there where I feel like it could be more pronounced. Every once in a while it has it, like those ending pages where we see variations of the sea. I
Yeah,
think I was really happy with that. Um, some of the waves are more dramatic and some of them are really soft, which is how it is. It's ever changing.
that's true. But I gotta tell you, when going into this, I said he's not gonna trick me. I know to look out for the number 3,
Oh.
and I still missed it because it was because it was so fluid with everything that you were drawing. We see Canif here. That's unfortunate.
We'll see.
Uh, and of course, the image of a sea serpent and Hope fighting it off. I think that's very visually striking, and I like the way that you make it. I'll just show it. I have the comic in front of me. I like the way that you make it like telescope down, like making it smaller and smaller.
Yeah,
And then as she gets out, it gets bigger and bigger again.
yeah, yeah. That was a fun sequence to figure out because I wanted the sea serpent to seem as fluid as the water.
Mhm.
And you know, even on the page before that, where the creature's going in and out of
Like
the,
this one.
yeah, going in and out of the water, and we're going in and out of the water with it in a couple shots when she's being dragged along, was super challenging to do. But I kind of like, I was almost picturing it like, how would this move if you were doing it on film? Um, and keeping the camera with the main character as much as possible as she's attached to the creature and is diving in and out between the waves, you know. That was super fun. And the other great thing I like about that whole moment is we get to see Hope like, no, she's a badass. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? She just goes after this thing because well, for one, she feels like she has to, but the way she does it so singularly, no one's helping her do it, and she at least at the very least wounds it enough for it to run away, which is so cool.
It's the first moment that she has, because we know it's established she's a really good thief, but it's the first moment that she has where she fights something off without using that special power of hers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very important moment to establish that. But Rosa still does not like her. I like
Yeah.
I like how you don't fall into the trap of making sure all the girls like each other.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, we kind of want to make sure that if they come to some sort of understanding, it feels like a natural evolution.
mhm.
Particularly because Rosa's, because of what Hope can do, Rosa sees how dangerous she is. She immediately recognizes being in proximity is dangerous. And so that's a hard thing to get past and to reconcile, But at the same time, they're thrust together. They all have to they're all in the same situation. And then the other, from Rosa's perspective is like, well, we're in this situation because what she stole from the tyrant,
So, this is your fault to begin with.
Yeah.
What design choice leads you to putting a tree in the middle of the page?
Primarily because I wanted to change the way for at least a moment to break up how you read it. So every once in a while, if I do a series of pages that I'm forcing you to read in one direction, just from left to right, when every now and then, after a few pages of that, I want to drop it and force you to read in halves. And it's kind of appropriate to do at that moment because the action's over. So now we can have something a little bit more formal in the way you read it. And by my hopes is that I'm kind of training the reader because they're reading so fluidly that I'm forcing them to break. I'm forcing them to read it the way I want them to read it by splitting it in half. They don't have a choice. They can't just jump across.
How hard is that to figure out?
It's not too hard.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's pretty easy. The toughest part is figuring out what to use as a break. And so a lot of times when I do that, it's either some sort of design piece or something that's in the environment that the characters are in that you can use as a break.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the construction of the layout, I have the tree breaking the panel itself. So the shapes of the panels continue, so you still understand it as a spread, but the tree cutting through it makes you read it in two halves, even though it can be taken as a whole. Yeah.
Overall, how much of your time, let's say it's a pie chart, how much of your time is spent conceptualizing the layout and how much of your time is spent drawing the things on it?
Conceptualizing is probably 5% versus 95%. So
Okay.
95% of the time is devoted to executing the idea, and 5% of the time is coming up with the idea. I tend to come up with layout concepts pretty quickly and easily. So much so I don't do the thumbnails or anything like that. I just kind of like, this is what I see it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times
that blows people's minds, whenever people find that out, that blows people's minds. J.H. Williams doesn't do thumbnails.
Well, I mean, one of the things that helps when writing my own stuff with Haden, we pepper in ideas into the script too, so I have time to ruminate on it. But sometimes those things will change when I get to the drawing stage, and I'll do something different than what we wrote as a layout idea. The page I'm working on now is a great example of that. So,
Still on issue 7? Or
oh yeah, unfortunately,
oh
yeah,
wow. That one's
yeah,
taken you a while, huh?
yeah, because without being spoilery, this whole sequence is all done like Rosa and
Mm-hmm.
Torch Grinder, like everything. So I'm finding myself, yeah, it's I put up a series of posts on Instagram, kind of showing the evolution of a spread
Yeah.
from first day to last day. It was 11 days, not counting time off. So roughly 2 weeks of time for 2 pages. So that can kind of give you an idea how time consuming it is. Um, so but it's led to interesting things to where I'm like, okay, we have to stick something else in this issue so we can break up the intensity of that kind of work, you know. But yeah, I'm almost done with the first sequence that involves that style. Then we break it up for a few pages, and then we return back to that style at the end of the issue.
I feel like you've just given away the setting of the issue. But I think I was going to ask this question much later, but I think you just answered it. I was going to say, out of all of the styles that you're doing, which one is the hardest? I feel like
Yeah,
you just answered.
yeah, I'd say this one for sure. And I'm spending a lot of time on it, and I'm still not satisfied with the effect. So every time I do a new page with this style, I'm kind of like taking it as a challenge to like, okay, how do I improve it as I go? Which was the same thing I felt drawing Rosa as we went along too. There was, you know, the early drawings of Rosa in the first couple of issues. I'm like, nope, it ain't right. And so I keep fussing with the style to get more and more of what I see it should be, especially because I knew we were going to be getting to seeing where she's from.
Yeah.
And so I needed to make, you know, hammer that. But it's, yeah, it's super challenging, particularly because we're dealing with a reality that I want people to see the details of the environment. But at the same time, it needs to be feel moody and evocative. Um, you know, like someplace a vampire would be from. So trying to find that balance of world building of the environment, but then still having enough shadow to have an atmosphere it's been tricky.
Speaking of where Rosa is from, so the next page, well, to catch up, Core has been found, and Hope has never been worried about him. Castrum, typical of of a Dick Tracy character, has been shot. Well, no, is bleeding.
Yeah.
Caniff has been cut in half,
Yeah.
and you say wait and see on that one. So feel like we haven't seen the last of him. Rosa and Dina and Hope are all there, and Rabbit is missing, which leads us to the next page, which is the first time we see Hope Red Hood in the woods with wolves. I feel like this is intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a clue on page 1 of issue 1 when she's having those flashback panels where she's thinking about her childhood and where she came in the scene where her parents are trying to coddle her or comfort her. There's a silhouette of a wolf head in the window on their door. So, yeah.
He just eat her grandma. And
That's going to be a thing that we'll get to at some point. We have a plan for that. But yeah, the wolves, we wanted to show that the wolves, although you can tell that they are in the same style as Rosa and Torch Grinder, they're much more pervasive. You know,
There's a lot of them.
right, they've spread out. Um, and I thought it was super interesting because we get to show one of them literally wearing armor, you know,
Yeah.
but the armor's in color, you know, so it's like
So they know that's from somewhere else.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the next page has the golem's
And
eye.
even Rosa knows it too, because she's like, fucking wolves.
she's not even annoyed. I mean, she's not even surprised that they're there.
Yeah.
She's like, ah.
Yeah.
When you do something like this, when it zigzags like that, how do you guide the reader's eye to that aside from just using the line? I mean, I feel like there's a trick into changing the shape of the panels and
Yeah, it's a lot figuring out the flow and knowing how the color is going to work too. So what helped with that scene is the top images are so dramatically different than the bottom images. The bottom images are more simplistic in palette and darker, a lot more black. Using the red arrows that are part of the environment that the characters are in the bottom reinforces that break. So not only do you have the zigzag of the arc of the eye drone kind of showing you which way to go, and you have the color of the eye drone's travel
trail,
flow. It's also backed up by those red arrows that are kind of going across the spread. So you don't have any other choice but to read it the way I want you to. But what's fun about it is how it creates this interesting change in how the top has this fluid aspect and the bottom is so rigid.
Yeah.
And it also kind of says something that the characters in the bottom is so rigid. It's so like, I don't know,
they're all about order. And
exactly. And the other fun thing about that layout in relation to the previous page, even though it's two different styles going on, it's one from the previous page is one flow. So it's almost like the wave of the ocean. Even when you think about the border choice, color choice, when the characters come out of the water onto land in a few pages back, it's the same color choice. So even though they're on land, I've kept the idea of the motion of the ocean, of the sea, this wave of, which is also kind of a subliminal thing, this wave of something ominous, you know. Yeah.
And the golem's arms are, how do you keep drawing this consistently? I know it's not
It's
drawn
not
the
consistent.
same, but it looks consistent.
Yeah. It was challenging. I mean, that's one of the things this scene here was actually not planned in the original outline. But after,
Really?
yeah.
I feel like it's a pivotal scene.
It is, yeah. We made it count. But the reason why we ended up putting it in there is because the fight scene in the previous issue with the golem and the cast, her rows were blasted away in that scene, and I didn't want to draw a character that was built like her and not have the parts have some sort of consistency. Mm-hmm. So in where they're positioned, particularly because she's made up, of different things, and therefore those different things are different colors. And I didn't want them to feel like they're just moving around.
Yeah. Even
though clearly they can move around. But I felt like there should be a consistency. And that was a lot of time to sort out every shot. That when it came down to writing this issue, I'm like, no, we got to get her partly clothed again, because in the original outline, she was just going to be without clothes from that point forward, because she's just on the trail. That's all that matters.
Oh, okay.
And so we decided, well, you know what? Let's have it to where when they go off into the ocean, that's how she loses track of them. And so she returns and it allowed us to put her back in some clothing and just focus on that and in the details of her in the arms. It worked out really nice because we get to have a one-on-one with her and Taros. And it also allowed us to see one of the weird creature pirates from the previous issue that she's obviously captured, you know. So it was, yeah, we made it count. It's cool because it's only two, not even 2 whole pages,
And it shows the dynamic between her and Taros, which surprised me. This is where I said I feel like this was pivotal because
Yeah.
I never got the impression that she was scared of Taros Demond, but
Right.
now I'm getting the impression that Taros Demond is scared of her.
I don't know if he's scared of her. He's impressed by her,
Okay.
but in an egotistical way because he created her. So he's impressed with himself. But at the same time, he has genuine feelings for her as his daughter. He views her as a daughter. And that's why he's like, let me fix your face for you and stuff. Cause he's like wanting to show this almost fatherly side of wanting her to be okay. And I love that bit where she's like, no, this shows I've lived. I have,
Like your
this,
wrinkles.
like a scar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very, for such a simple little scene, it's got a lot packed into it on emotional layers and subtext and stuff. Yeah.
I think it comes off to me like he's scared of her just because I'm used to these dictator figures ordering people around. So whenever they don't,
Yeah.
whenever they don't, I'm like, oh, they must be scared of him, the bully.
And the other thing I like about that scene is we get a size ratio aspect. You can see he's not a tall man.
No.
He's shorter than her, which I love. I think that's so cool.
Or is he a tall man and she's just taller?
Could be.
Treasure Island. So this is the second page in a row where it is like a half scene as well, because you spend a whole half of the spread establishing Treasure Island. But all that stuff is really important.
Yeah, it was a difficult page to figure out. It's funny because like when I look at it now, I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I figured that out because there is just so, because especially with the page being squat, right?
Yeah.
And being able to just split it in half like that and pack in all that information at the top and then use a design that was so dramatic, making you feel like you've entered under this archway into this village on Treasure Island kind of aspect. Yeah, that was a trick. Yeah, I think I probably spent 2 days just figuring it out when I was laying it out. Yeah.
Right. So 2 days is the 5%. So the 95%.
No, that's the drawing stage.
Yeah, but that's interesting to me because when I look at this page, I'm like, this is not one of the pages where I thought you would have a hard time. So this is how different it looks once it's executed, I guess.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I'm like, oh, it's an establishing shot and then a scene at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that you had a hard time with it.
It's because I think that you have the archway and the shapes, because I want almost like this vaguely Moroccan kind of thing going on, the shapes of the panels.
Yeah.
And then making sure each of those characters in the bottom have their moment without ever losing their place in the scene, like where they are in the scene, but they each had to have their moment, and Romulus very in particularly. And then the top needing to establish a variety of things in that little town, there's a variety of styles and things going on there.
It's a diverse town.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's parts of that I'm not as happy with, because it doesn't.
Like which ones?
I wish it was a little bit more. I had a little bit more room to make it feel a little bit more of a realistic town. But I kind of had to shorthand some things and make it a little more extra stylized, so I could get in the characters and the diversity of the characters and make sure we got the palace in the distance, in that first shot.
I feel like every place you've taken us to so far is a place that I would really like to see more of.
Cool. That's the whole idea.
That's the whole idea. This first shot of Romulus looks like it was taken from a Kirby drawing. I want to say it's Dr. Doom sitting down on his throne, but I'm not sure.
That pose is purposefully stolen from a very important comic, actually.
Is it Mephisto?
No.
No? I'll figure it out. Which one is it? Give up.
One of Loki's early appearances.
Oh. I knew it was a Kirby.
Huh?
I knew it was a Kirby.
No, it's Buscema.
Oh, I'm wrong. Okay.
Yeah, there's a shot that I love of Loki, where he's half slouched in his throne, and but he still seems so menacing in that shot. And I thought, I totally want to use that same pose because it says a lot about Romulus's personality, and says a lot about how the other characters, when they start to interact with him and talk about him, that they don't know if they can trust him. Right? He's a pirate.
Yeah.
And so it says a lot. It's like the subliminal thing. Anybody, the fact that you picked up that it reminded you of something from comics history was super important, even if you didn't recognize exactly what it was. I wanted that impulse feeling,
Yeah, that's funny because it's a Loki by Buscema, and I thought it was Mephisto, and I'm like,
right.
And now, even if I said I knew it was a Kirby, now I'm realizing Kirby never drew Mephisto. That was Buscema. Absolutely. Eventually, will you get to tell us the story of why Romulus ended up on Treasure Island?
A little bit. There's hints of it in some of the dialogue.
Yeah.
Like, when she's telling him about, making this deal with him, about you can annex your own private little kingdom. There's hints about that he is looking to be more than what he is, and that relates to part of the reasons why he's not in Fourth Realm currently.
And we have him here talking to 3 characters who are clearly from Horror Hill. I can't tell what Barnabas is supposed to be, a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
clearly a very different vampire than Rosa.
A very different vampire than Rosa. I feel like he's a 90s vampire.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Or 80s, late
80s, early 90s vampire.
He is wearing a t-shirt that's a rock and roll t-shirt, so wearing shades indoors. He's clearly a little full of himself.
And then he and Rosa meet, and Rosa he and Hope meet, and Hope has everyone else with him, and Hope has talked about him in the previous issue, talking about why they would hate each other and why Romulus would hate her specifically. And then we find out they used to date. Yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Will we ever see that particular flashback at any point?
I don't know. We haven't decided how much of that we're going to show, other than the relationship between her and her and Core, it plays a strong relevance in some of the outcomes of where we're going. Yeah.
I feel like we already know that Romulus is going to double cross her because he is surrounded by wolves of all things. I feel like that's foreshadowing right there. My favorite line from all of this is when he says, my mutts will take you below to get sorted out. We'll get your boys stitched up, fill your bellies, and hoist the sails of one of my most mediocre ships, because I did love you once.
Yeah.
He's a petty man, this Romulus. I find it fascinating also the next page where, you know, you're going from not a rigid page layout, but you know, it is kind of ordered, and then you get back into the water.
Yeah.
This right here is like a marvelous shot of the marine life in this particular sea. And I was wondering, what are you inspired by when you're coming up with things that don't really exist but exist in this world and have some resonance with the real world like this?
Yeah, it's super challenging. That layout in particular was another tough one to figure out, because I wanted to capture the potential of the vastness of the sea, but we had all this other information that had to be in there too on the side, and we had to see, you know, the golem's plane arriving as well. And I thought I've always enjoyed when I see, even in film, when you get that split thing between the top and the bottom, and then you see what's underneath the surface of the water. It's always an interesting trick, but with this, we had to really kind of push the expectation of it, because not only is it just split, it's literally in 3D, right? So that split, usually when you see that in a camera, it's just like a blunt, like here's the divide right in front of you, right? The divide had to change, right? So that way it can move behind the panels it needed to move behind and still feel like you're getting to look underneath the water. That was really tricky to figure out. The funny thing about it, before I talk about the sea life, is after I figured out the layout, I'm like, it looks like a faucet.
This right here.
Yeah, looks like a faucet. And so I'm like, I'm going to separate the panels a little bit as they drop into the water. And then Dave, I told that story to Dave, and he totally like picked it up because he grabbed the same color of going underneath the water that we had previously. And it really enhances the idea of this drop, you know, I don't know, it's just like this weird, goofy, off the wall idea, but it works so nicely because you feel like this drop happen.
It goes from rigid to back to fluid.
Yeah.
How do
and
you
I think it was
decide
important to separate the bottom of those last couple panels. I thought it was really important to separate them.
This one.
Yeah, those breaks, which
How
enhances the idea of a drop, you know.
How do you decide when a background is just going to continue like that? Like, do you just know, or?
I kind of just instinctually feel that, particularly when you're wanting to create a movement. I felt like, you know, we could have done it to where it was broken up, you know, and you had these individual side-by-side shots, which is fine to do it that way, but I kind of felt like I wanted to have the feeling of the motion, because they're stuck in this thing and it's being dropped down this track. And I really wanted to get the aspect of it being dropped down this track. And then you see the track continue under the water past all this crazy sea life, which was a great segue to talk about the sea life. The sea life, I wanted it to feel like the like a vivid coral reef has all this life on it, right? And I wanted to have that same feeling. But and when you look at the underwater sea life, it feels like so otherworldly, even on our own Earth. When you look at a coral reef, there's like all this crazy types of life and animals and plants and stuff. And I wanted to capture that same feeling, but not draw anything I've seen before. It just reminds you of it. So it makes you, it's almost like an echo in a way, of what you would expect to find under the water, but yet there's things down there. You're like, oh, those are actual flowers. Oh, those are mushrooms. Oh, that kind of stuff. And then the weird rectangular diamond shaped jellyfish type thing, that I felt feels like, okay, that's when okay, I'm not seeing that here on Earth. That's definitely somewhere else.
I'll tell you the most amazing thing to me about this whole spread. So we got the faucet, right? We got the faucet. It drops right here, takes you right here where we enjoy all the sea life. I'm enjoying the fact that you drew it like we were inside the sea.
Yeah.
With the way that looks. And as I'm enjoying that, my eye is drawn to here. This is where I end the page.
Interesting.
And that takes us right to the next scene.
Yeah.
Because that's the ship the Golem is in.
I think the other thing that's fun about that underwater scene is you see that, oh, well, there's construction under there. There's, ruins. Like there's that octopus that's carved out of stone, and then the triangular stone thing that the track is running into and stuff like that. So it's not like it had to count. It could be just, we're just going to show you all this crazy sea life and make you wonder why it's familiar but different. But there had to be other things under there that make you think about the world we're showing you.
We are nearing the end of this, and we have here Romulus talking to the Golem and basically calling her bluff, saying you don't have an army, you can't take us all on. And she gives this what I feel is an amazing line: I don't need an army, I am Armageddon. And then it goes into a huge explosion.
I think Haden came up with that line.
It's a pretty good line. I love it. And then it comes off with this huge explosion. That is, the third time I think that you've used the huge explosion as a big double page spread, or maybe second. It's interesting because even though this is the third issue and you've used the explosion a number of times, it never fails to lose its impact.
Oh, good.
And I feel that's because you show enough quiet moments in between all of the action.
Right. And I also think it helps the fact that I purposefully try to handle each one different. Is the way they're constructed is different. So,
and this one takes out with it a lot of the wolves. So
yeah,
that's very interesting. We end with a 3-page sequence where Rabbit is lost in the Echolands and just going around on a little raft. And then it ends with him landing on Metamaru Mountain, being met by a mecha, which made me go, as I mentioned to you at the start of this, holy shit. I'm so hyped. What is the design inspiration for, as if I even need to ask this, for Metamaru Mountain and its inhabitants?
Shogun Warriors.
And why blue and gold as opposed to any other colors?
I don't know. There's something about the contrast of the hot and cold color. And I think what really makes it for me is peppering it with bits of red. So you have those three different colors. There's something about the way those break up that are, it's like, I don't know, it's vivid. It's toys. It's like toys, you know. It just you know, Shogun Warriors would do that. Where you have that mix of cold and hot color. Transformers would do that.
Yeah.
You know, you see that kind of combination a lot. And it's so classic, you know. I could even see like Mazinger,
Yeah.
yeah,
Z.
as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's something, it works for me.
Uh is Metamaru Mountain the land of anything inspired by Japanese pop culture, or is it just the land of mechas?
You'll find out. I'm not going to tell you.
Because I'm
You
waiting for
don't
some
get the
kaiju
answer
here.
next issue.
And Metamaru Mountain makes me think now, it's just, is there any genre you're not into? Is there anything that's not going to show up?
The idea is for us to be able to move in whatever direction we want. So the fact that this is literally why we call it Echolands, because it's a world where all these different things exist at the same time. So in, like I had talked about before, there's reasons for it, why it's that way. And there'll be something that is discovered along the way. But it's super interesting because, like, you know, when we show it, we don't mention it much as we go along, but we drop it in here and there where the characters are referencing where they're from before the Hope stole the gem, and that they were this band of thieves in San Francisco. And you're like, what kind of San Francisco is that, right? But then that exists in the same reality as something like Metamaru Mountain, or where Rose is from, Horror Hill, you know. So,
which we might see in a future issue. So we have right here, I think very interesting. We've got the mecha. What I assume is the base of operations / headquarters. And the lower half of a statue, which is almost as big as the mecha itself.
Interesting. Yeah, it could be a statue. It does look like feet, doesn't it?
It does. Are you saying it's not?
I don't know. It could be. It could be very weathered and worn away. Could be.
The spell with the wizard, the interview with Alias 5, afterwards, we see items like the lost history, the age of echoes, the fact that old Chicago is in line with Terros de Monde, while Fourth Rome and Horror Hill are not. We talk about Bone Plains and Green Lung, so there's still even more lands that we haven't seen. I feel like you're doing a lot of world building in this back matter here.
Yeah, yeah. It's the perfect opportunity to do so, because the way the narrative of what's happening with the characters is it's fast. They're on the run. It's this action thing, and they're jumping from place to place. But there's a lot of other things that we want to convey, and if we try to shoehorn that into the main narrative, it would feel shoehorned in. So this gives us an opportunity to flesh out the possibilities of the world while doing something interesting that kind of acts as a companion to the main narrative, and tells us also about, you know, maybe what kind of person Terros de Monde is, what his goals are. I think it plays a really key role in that, because he doesn't get a lot of screen time in the main narrative, which is fine, but it makes it to where he gets three-dimensional really quickly, rather than having to build that up over many issues. So
I do like how in his earlier scene he was like, "I'm late for my interview with Alias 5."
Yeah. So now that's our first clue, like, oh, this interview is in tandem with the events of what we're seeing, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're going to try to explore that as much as we can, where you can see like, oh, things are in line with each other.
So
So
you do a lot of things here, like, you mentioned things like the golden rod rose, the creeping hemshock vine, but the thing that I find that I would like most to talk about is this. As J.H. Williams III, do you believe somebody like Taros Demond should be given a platform by the Echo, right? Like, do you, because the reason I'm asking that is because like a month ago or so, a very popular actress in the Philippines um interviewed a presidential candidate who is the son of our former dictator, and she
okay.
just asked, she was just really, really soft about the whole thing, I guess. And it was this whole thing about, should we give dictators or the offspring of dictators a platform? And what would you say if you were a citizen of the Echolands talking to Alias 5, knowing that he just interviewed Taros Damond?
Yeah, I think a lot of the citizens, at least the ones that clearly don't fall in line, would be mad about it. um, but one thing that's interesting is that it shows, just like in our own reality, they're going to get a platform. Someone's going to want to talk to them, right? Because whether they're a good person or a bad person, if they're a politician or famous or a dictator or whatever, people are going to want to know more about them, regardless of whether they've done good things or bad things.
Mm,
I just
yeah.
think it's inevitable, sort of like a human nature curiosity thing, you know. And I think we've talked about this before, in the way Alias 5 talks to him, he's clearly not afraid to um, be pointed, you know. So, while at the same time, he's a little bit enamored with all the details surrounding the interview, like the environment and the little details he's noticing wherever they happen to be sitting down or whatever. He's clearly enamored with that because no one gets to see that, right? So, um, yeah, it's interesting because it's a similar thing, like when you see an actual journalist, like say a TV anchor journalist or a hard-nosed journalist, and they make an appearance in a movie that's a fantasy movie, like a Marvel movie or
Yeah.
something like that. It feels a little weird because you're like, wait, you're a
Anderson
journalist,
Cooper is here for some reason.
right? So it's like this weird blurring of uh, entertainment and reality, So, and I think Alias 5 is sort of like, he's willing to be there because it's the interesting story, whether this person he's talking to is a good person or not, because the cult of personality aspect comes
Yeah.
into play.
In this version of Here We Ego by Anton Veracruz, the robot is riding a dragon and the other smaller drone-like robot is flying by. The robot says, "This is joy." The smaller drone-like robot says, "Are you sure?" The last two we've mentioned has been kind of a commentary and you creating Echolands. Which one of you and Haden is the robot and which one is the drone-like robot?
I don't think either.
Okay. And also very interesting is we see an ad for the Scurvy Queen. So this is the first time we're seeing an ad for something that we've already seen in the story proper.
Yeah.
And I feel like this really adds to the world building of it, And also now I'm wondering if certain things are going to play into these ads that will then play into the main story. Like, will somebody take up Bloody Gums and his crew or on this particular particular ad, or and then later on, do you plan to do things like that, making these really pivotal to the main story, or
On and off. I just, they, I think, I know Hayden thinks about that with the ads more than I do. For me, I don't feel like the ads have to necessarily pertain to what's something we've seen already. Or at least not all of them, I like the idea of the ads just adding one more bit of texture, something that you might not have seen, but it's nice to have something here and there that anchors to something that's been revealed or part of the narrative somewhere, so yeah,
you
it's just
know
something to play with,
you know what former J.H. Williams the third thing these ads remind me of?
uh,
Weeping Gorilla.
oh, that's good.
Sometimes it had something to do with the story and sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
Either way, it was funny.
Yeah.
And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I feel like you're just scratching the surface. You are one half done with the first arc of this storyline, of this series, the first arc of this series, and you've got some letters here. Again, surprisingly, talking about issue 1. I thought they'd be talking about issue 2, and then a bunch of them saying that you're just scratching the surface, and also somebody saying that you should put out an art book called The Many Tricks of J.H. Williams.
I thought that was funny.
Are there any plans for any of that, and how do you feel about getting halfway done here, halfway released?
In some ways, I feel like it's too soon because it's like we're not far into the series as we want production wise.
Of course.
But there's nothing I can do about that. It's just the way it is. But yeah, it's weird because you work on something for such a long time and it just rolls out super quick, and you're like, oh, we're at the 3-month mark already. It's like it just doesn't feel right.
Is that the weirdest thing with any work of art? It's like you guys work on it for so long and then people like me read it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, it does. Hopefully, the thing I think about with that is hopefully it's something that will inspire people to reread it.
Yeah.
And want to spend time with it and think about it. So, yeah, it'd be terrible if it was something, it was read and then immediately forgotten about. It's just like, oh, it's just another comic, if working on something for so long. So hopefully it's, inspiring a lot of rereading while still being a fun read. So
when people ask me what I look for in a comic, I say, does it look rereadable? That's the first thing I say. Because I'm like, these, comics aren't cheap. And I would like
yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to read them as many times as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So congratulations on getting halfway done with the first arc. Before we close, can I share my screen and ask you about something not related to Echolands?
Sure.
Okay. So this is I just found out about this. There's this little Nemo tribute this week. I tagged you in it on Twitter. And I'm surprised that I only found out about this. It's been out for a few years.
Oh yeah, it's been a while.
What was the creative process like behind this Nemo tribute?
Let me see if I can remember well. I mean, ultimately, it was part of this book that was all sort of like tribute to Winsor McKay's Little Nemo. And I can't remember. I think I don't remember if I saw other samples ahead of time. I can't remember, but I wanted to do something that was sort of like make you think about reality. And I always thought about like, I always thought it was interesting at the end of those strips is the little boy would wake up from these fantastical dreams and wonder,
Yeah.
and I sort of wanted something that was almost a reverse idea of that. I think the challenge of it was fitting all of what I wanted to do with it in one page. And basically give you almost a complete narrative in one page. So that was really, really difficult. I'm hoping to reuse this again at some point.
This right here, this curve was really inspired.
Oh,
Very.
cool.
You're hoping they reuse this again?
I'm hoping I get to use it in some other way, maybe a poster or I don't know, something. I asked Dave recently if after I saw you post about it, I asked Dave if he has still has the high res file of the colored piece. And he says he does. So he's
Awesome.
gonna send it to me because I want to reuse it. I have a concept that I've been developing, hopefully get to do at some point, where that piece actually, if we don't do it as a poster, could be used as an opener to a different story. Like that it's there's a strip that some character is reading at the beginning of a story. So yeah,
I take it you can't talk about the concept.
no.
That would be pretty cool though. Yeah, and
I mean, I could, but I shouldn't.
Oh, so you're already talking to publishers about it, I assume.
No, the pitch isn't even fully finalized. It's just the impetus of it. I'll tell you what the impetus of it is I wanted to, a couple years ago, before the pandemic started, I kept seeing like this big push for adventure stories where all the characters are always these teenagers. And I'm like, why is there this obsession with telling adventure tales featuring teenagers read by adults? And I always thought about, it made me think about like, and so I got into this whole kind of philosophical discussion with my co-author for this, where we were kind of like, well, what's the psychology of that? And we were thinking like, well, there's this notion, I think, from a lot of the editorial side of things, that younger is always better. Younger is what's going to sell. That younger people won't read about older people. And I remember when I was growing up, particularly reading comics, all the characters I read about were older than me.
Yeah.
Right. I had no problems with that. I thought that was interesting. And now there's like this there seems to be a little bit of a reverse where you see older readers reading about younger than themselves, which is kind of interesting. But I kind of feel like that doesn't mean it has to be that way.
No one wants to be an adult today.
Well, I kind of feel like if you tell the right story, you can tell a story about someone who's old, and you can buy into the fantasy adventure.
I feel like I can see where the little Nemo thing is coming from, is playing into it.
Yeah.
What can you spend a little bit of time just talking about Winsor Mckay?
Genius. Looking at Winsor Mckay artwork is equally awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time, because it's so imaginative that it's humbling. Like if you're a creative person and wanting to be an artist or work in comics, and you look at what he could do on the page, and where it was just so wild all the time. And there's like, I don't know how many pages of this stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of pages. And it's just the level of imagination is what makes it terrifying, because you're like, how it's almost akin to Kirby in that way. You're like, how has all this come out of one person? But then the way he would execute it is so wonderful and beautiful. It just your jaw drops, just like taking it all in. Yeah.
I made the argument before that Winsor Mckay is arguably as or more important than Jack Kirby, and some people got really mad at me.
Oh, really?
My argument was I felt like Mckay was the first guy chronologically in comics that really made panels move from one to another, because I feel like before that it was really a struggle. It was really just one, it was one image after another, but he kind of made it look like it moved, which, as the guy who pretty much popularized animation, kind of makes sense. The other argument I had was he came first. So the comics industry that Jack Kirby came into literally would not exist without Winsor Mckay.
Right. Yeah. I guess maybe people get mad because of the initial impact of where comics went, particularly I get superhero comics, but then at the same time, you could go back, look at Will Eisner. I think there's different factions of the comics industry that have pull from these different influences, and some are more obvious, like Jack Kirby, and some are less obvious, like Winsor Mckay. I guess, yeah. I guess it depends on what you're looking for.
Absolutely. I was just like, well, in the case of a tie, I'm going to go with the older guy.
Right.
I feel like that logically makes sense. But so having said that about Winsor Mckay's artwork, though, what do you think about Winsor Mckay's lettering?
Oh, it's so funky. It's so funky. That was one of the reasons, like, when I did that piece, it's funny because Todd did the lettering on that Winsor Mckay tribute piece, and I wanted it to feel like kind of like the Winsor Mckay stuff, a little bit boxed in, small. But Todd is so good; he's like, he couldn't help but make it look neater than Winsor Mckay. So it looks kind of funny because his lettering is so neat, but then the numbers that I hand drew are really wonky. So it's like this, it's so funny. But yeah, I remember talking to Todd about that a little bit. He's like, yeah, his lettering is it's wonky.
I love how when he ran out of space, he would just go down the sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, how are you this
or
good?
didn't quite fit in that balloon very well. So it's a little tight.
It's like, how are you this good at literally everything else?
It almost seems to me that he didn't care as much about that part.
Does not seem like it, no.
Yeah.
Last question to close us off. What are you enjoying these days?
Oh, I'm reading some horror comics. Picked up a trade paperback of EC Vault of Horror.
Always a good choice.
Yeah. Super cool. We're all in, Halloween mode this month.
Yeah.
So we watched Midnight Mass. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I heard about that.
It's so good. And now we're watching Brand New Cherry Flavor, which is also incredibly good.
I have not heard about that, but
it's tremendous. Weird, very weird, but all in the best ways possible.
Who's your favorite EC horror artist?
Well, I don't think I have one.
They're all so good.
Yeah, they're all so good. They each have their own kind of distinct thing going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I was talking to Hilary Barta and he was saying that Wally Wood was his biggest influence. And I
Mm,
completely see it. It's just I never would have thought about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Hillary uses a lot of cartooniness in his characters versus Wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the level of detail you can relate, you can see. Yeah,
Once he says it, it's obvious,
yeah, yeah.
but your mind doesn't go there right away.
No,
Anyway, thank you, Mr. J.H. Williams.
you bet.
This was great. Same time next issue,
Sure.
same Echo time, same Echo channel.